Hello and welcome to today's Teachit Languages webinar. My name's Suzi Bewell and today's webinar is all about tackling the new GCSE for modern foreign languages, time-effective strategies to get your Key Stage 3 language learners exam ready. So in terms of the webinar, we'll be focusing on three main things. We'll spend a little bit of time looking at the changes to the GCSE. Then we'll move on to phonics and how to help your learners to understand the sound spelling link. And then secondly, we'll be looking at the new element of dictation, how to help your learners to use their phonic awareness to assist them with their target language writing. And then finally, I'll be sharing some external links which you can look at in your own time. We will be sharing the PowerPoint as well as a video of this recording to all attendees. So in terms of an overview of changes, obviously a lot has been written in recent months about the changes, but for me, this excellent summary of the new GCSE for languages by Helen Myers from the Association for Language Learning is the best one-stop shop. I would particularly reference pages 53 to 57, which specifically reference dictation, and pages 76 to 83, which specifically reference reading aloud speaking tasks. So in terms of phonics and dictation, according to the subject content for French, German and Spanish GCSEs, in the exam, students will need to learn to be able to confidently read aloud from a written prompt. Students will also be expected to pronounce words with stress patterns that allow their speech to be clear and comprehensible. And students will use their phonic awareness to transcribe what they hear with a good degree of accuracy. Now, back in 1964, this was written about phonics. Phonics may be the powerful ally that we languages teachers are seeking to help us form good pronunciation and spelling habits in our classrooms. Their role as essential guides to pronunciation and determiners of correct spelling is now practically beyond controversy. Yet, in spite of all the evidence in favour of the use of phonics, they are rarely used in our foreign language classes beyond a few comparisons that probably will not leave a lasting impression. So this is not something new. Looking at the Key Stage 3 framework for languages, which I know some colleagues in secondary languages teaching still refer to, there was a strand 4.1 which referred to letters and sounds. And here it gave us a really clear idea of progress, what progress in terms of phonic awareness might look like from year 7 through to year 9. More recently still, Ofsted, in their report Achievement and Challenge in 2011, said too much speaking still relied on writing, and where students did not understand the conventions between sound and spelling, commonly known as the sound spelling links, pronunciation and reading aloud were often weak and a barrier to communication. You can find a full copy of that document at the bottom of the page. More recently still, we have heard about the 3 pillars model of language learning from Ofsted. Here it talks about how schemes of learning should show clear logic behind progression in phonics, including when to teach differences between English sound spelling correspondences and those of the target language. There should also be evidence in curriculum planning that plan, practice and review of phonemes and how these link to graphemes is happening across key stages. And some of you, I'm sure, are starting to think about that in your schemes of learning. So just a quick pause for thought. I'm going to read out some phrases and I want you to think about where you are currently. I don't really teach phonics. I mean, I think I teach students how to pronounce the language, but I don't think I overtly teach it. How many times do students learn something by heart and it sounds dreadful? Perhaps thinking about your GCSE students now. I usually just teach pronunciation as things crop up. Certainly used to be me. I feel it would be more useful to come into year 7 with a knowledge of certain sounds rather than knowing about the weather or pets. And finally, I forget how easy it is to mispronounce words as a beginner. So just think about where you are currently. Now, moving on to what could progression look like in phonics. If this is a new concept in your language teaching and learning, then it might be that in the next weeks or months, you just focus on stages 1 and 2. If you're a bit further on in your awareness of teaching and learning around phonics, you might just want to think about how you can introduce it a little bit earlier in the curriculum and how you build that up through stages 1 to 6 throughout the years from year 7 through to GCSE, particularly with the new GCSE in mind. So I'm going to give you some examples here, hopefully practical solutions and activities that you can use that are not particularly difficult or time consuming to introduce and that just slot alongside your existing scheme of learning. So in stage one, it's all about hearing and identifying the sound. So, for example, teachers could start by introducing an isolated phoneme, and then they could ask the pupils to identify any words that they already know that contain that sound. So in Spanish, for example, it could be the phoneme A, and the examples that they might give you could be cuatro, agosto, and amarillo. The teacher might also read a familiar rhyme, and the pupils could count how many times they hear the sound in that particular passage. This is something that I've been doing in recent weeks, and it's quite nice to see the students using their fingers to show you that they're actually actively engaged in the counting. And perhaps for a more active and engaging take on this task, it all depends on your learners, pupils could also do a Mexican wave every time they hear the sound, or what some of my primary language learners quite like to do is a dab. Moving on. Still on stage one, hearing and identifying the sound. This is a game that I like to play sometimes in my language lessons, perhaps as a starter, and it's called Spot the Common Sound. So here, for example, you've got the sh in chat and chemise. You've got the s sound in serpent, ça va, cinq, and so on. You could come up with some of your own very easily just with a few clip art pictures. In stage two, it's more about repeating and producing the sound. So, again, using the same familiar short rhyme that you used in stage one, the pupils could listen again several times and then simply repeat. It could be done in a fun way, so slowly, quickly, with a silly voice in the style of a robot. Just add a little bit of fun to the task. And there's a little source button at the bottom there, where, for example, the h sound, which I've been practicing with my year 8 students recently, just getting them to produce a tongue twister, for example, like the one below. In stage three, it's more about practicing the sound. Now, the way I like to do this is with regular dice, perhaps writing a list of words or phonemes on the board, and then the students have got to try and practice those according to what they land on. Or they could even use toolsforeducators.com/dice, and you could form your own dice and think about the sounds that your students struggle with or the sounds that are cropping up in the particular module of work that you are working on currently. I also like these phonics fans. Again, you can create your own using the link at the bottom. You don't have to spend any of your departmental budget on these, but think about the key sounds that the students are struggling with. So, some examples in French here. You could put the sounds in Spanish or in German, and then you would get the students simply to raise their fan, and depending on the series of words that you read out to them, they would lift up the fan according to the corresponding sound. So the fans, yeah, they could have anything up to 10 graphemes on them. And the teacher would say a sound, the pupils hold up the corresponding card. And then it could be that you move on a stage further, progress to monosyllabic words. So, for example, animal names in French. So they could have the un sound, which I know a lot of my learners struggle with those nasal sounds. Alain, le lapin, mange du pain. And every time they hear the un sound, they could lift up their fan, they could do a Mexican wave. You could use that in a number of ways. Stage four is more about distinguishing the sound. So for this one, I might like to get my students out their seats and play a game like Four Corners flashcards. So I'd stick 4 grapheme cards around the classroom. So it could, for example, be the sounds one, un, ou, and I. And when I say a phoneme, the pupils move, and it could be walking or running, depending on the stage, on the space, or they could just simply point to the corresponding corner. You could then progress to the teacher saying words containing the relevant graphemes and repeat. So it could be numbers, for example, which I know I've been doing recently with my year 3 learners. Trois, cinq, douze, treize. And again, they would go to the corresponding corner. Once the pupils grow in confidence, it would be quite nice to give them the opportunity to be the teacher and to offer words of their own choosing. Again, in stage 4, around the idea of distinguishing the sound, you could use a Venn diagram type activity. This works really well in German. So 2 graphemes are chosen. So in this instance, the graphemes are the EI, I sound, and the IE sound, E, which I know confused many students of German. You would label each circle with a grapheme, and the overlap is there to house the words containing both sounds. So in this instance, words like ein und vierzig. The pupils would then sort the numbers, or it could be objects or picture cards, into the correct space according to the sound that they contain. And I've also done this using hula hoops, so it's quite nice if you've got a big space or if you could perhaps go into the school hall. For stage 5, this is about linking the graphemes to the phonemes and vice versa. So looking first at the written word to the spoken word. It's really nice to bring in some elements of poetry. We know in the Key Stage 3 curriculum, we are encouraged to use authentic texts and poems and rhymes. So this is one which we have been given permission to use by Marie-Odile Guillu. And Marie-Odile here has written a poem, so it's quite topical at the moment, about La Fête des Rois. She's linked it to colours, but she's also thought about the particular sounds that are likely to come up in this poem. It'd be really nice for the students to have a go, if they've got a little bit of phonic awareness, at saying the poem aloud and then using what they have studied in their lessons to think about other words that contain those sounds. I also like this activity to link the spoken word to the written word. So this activity requires a few sets of French or Spanish or German alphabet cards, plus all variations of the vowels, obviously containing accents. The pupils have to listen to the teacher pronouncing the word and then form the word. So physically hold up the cards with the alphabet. If you have the colourful vests like the ones in the picture, you could have the students popping the letters into the vest. And pupils can spell out the words physically, either in small groups, or it could even be done individually or in pairs on a mini whiteboard. It doesn't have to be out of seats. Thinking about the spoken word to the written word, pupils could listen to the teacher pronouncing two separate words that are displayed on the board. They have to listen to the word and decide which written example, A or B, is the best match. So, for example, the teacher might say junio, following some practice of the ch phoneme, and then pupils could choose between A, which would be junio, and B, which would be julio. So quite similar in sound. For level 6, it's more about moving from syllables and word level to sentence level. So in this example, we're going to look at some tongue twisters. Pupils would be shown the text and try to work out the pronunciation unaided. The teacher would then read it aloud. You could then practice saying it together as a class. You could divide it into boys versus girls. You could have the front of the room to the back of the room, the left side of the room to the right side of the room, however you want to divide your students, make it into a bit of a competition, and then have different groups competing to say it most clearly, most loudly, most quietly. And as an extension opportunity, perhaps invite some more confident individuals to have a go. As homework or as a follow-up, perhaps, you could have your students find a tongue twister containing a particular grapheme or compose one of their own. For some French tongue twisters, you could use the example of un bon chasseur est un chasseur sachant chasser sans son chien. I can't say that one without taking my teeth out. There's a German example, and then you've also got some Spanish trabalenguas. For a link to lots of tongue twisters in lots and lots of different languages, not just French, German, and Spanish, you can follow the link at the bottom of the page. Some top tips before we move on to dictation. I would say in terms of decoding in the second foreign language, it is generally speaking about teaching your learners the code. Can you be more overt in the teaching of sounds? Do you currently just teach it as it crops up? Can you link the sound to spelling and show the written word? This is something perhaps in your teacher training you were discouraged from doing. Could you ask your primary colleagues to share some good practice? So, for example, how do they teach first language phonics using a technique like Jolly Phonics, for example? Could you challenge your pupils to think about the difficulties of English pronunciation? If, for example, you have pen friends or an international link with a school abroad, could you raise that question with your partner school? Preempt poor pronunciation and support pupils to better understand the second foreign language that they are working with so that they can improve and feel successful. We all know when we look at our schemes of learning that there will be some sounds, some words that the students will struggle with. So it's about identifying those words and then building into our scheme of learning a column that incorporates a phonics element. And finally, make it engaging. It should be a fun activity, not something that the students dread. So moving on now to dictation. Again, let's think about what progression could look like, particularly if this is completely new to you. Now, we'll hold up my hand and say that whilst I was preparing this webinar, I reached out to the modern languages community and I asked them about what they were already doing. So not all of the ideas in this presentation are necessarily my own, but I am really keen to try as many of these different activities as I can in the coming weeks and months, because the The sooner, if you like, I can start to prepare my Key Stage 3 learners for what's coming in the new GCSE, the more prepared they will be when they actually sit the exam. So for stage 1, we're talking about low challenge and high support, helping the students to feel confident and successful. So for example, it could be focusing on how to write down certain isolated phonemes. So for example, vowels. In stage 2, what might be a medium challenge with medium support. An example might be transcribing words and short sentences with a word bank or a jigsaw grid. For stage 3, we're getting more complex, high challenge with low supports. So, for example, transcribing a few sentences with limited support, such as the first letters, or providing a part translation, perhaps in the form of a parallel text. And for stage 4, we're talking about high challenge and no support. So, this could simply be transcribing longer texts unaided, probably what most of us think of when we think of dictation. So, in terms of low challenge, high support, students are presented with a word or text minus one isolated phoneme. They have to listen carefully and fill in the missing grapheme. This could progress over time to incorporate several phonemes. So, the phoneme, for example, could be E, and in the examples below, you've got some words which contain the E sound in French. So, souris, igloo, six, dix, gris, and ici. Moving on, faulty transcript, or sometimes known as faulty echo. Your pupils would have access to a very short dictation passage in the target language, perhaps just one short sentence that contains some mistakes. They have to stand up, or perhaps if you have a buzzer, they press the buzzer when they hear the teacher make an error. Develop this over time to longer text. I'm just going to show you on the next slide an example of what a longer text might look like. So you're working towards this progressively with your students. So the pupils would have the English version to the correct transcript. The teacher would have the French version to read aloud twice. And the pupils, once they have made their corrections, could even pair up to reconstruct the text in French. Support may be given in the form of images and first letter clues. So depending on what stage your learners are at, you can make it easier or more complex. This is what I call dictation tick and flick, and this is something that I've been doing for a number of years. The teacher produces a list of words, and the pupils simply tick what they hear. You would also include some red herrings and words that you don't choose to include from recent topics. So, for example, we could have me llamo, mi familia, mis amigos, un pueblo, and pequeño. For a medium challenge with medium support, it might be a back-to-back gap fill dictation in pairs. So your students would sit back to back and they would have a dictation which would contain differing gaps in the same shared text. Person A would start and read up to their first gap, and then person B would continue until their next gap, and so on and so on. They sit back to back so that they obviously can't see their partner's text. This next idea is about a gap fill from a transcript. So again, it could be something as straightforward as a text taken from a textbook. So a transcript, for example, I often download the transcripts on ActiveLearn to go over what the students have heard in their listening task. So the gap fill should be no more than a few sentences maximum. At this stage, remember, we're medium challenge, medium support. And depending on the confidence of learners, the teacher could also offer a range of words in a text box, again, including some red herrings. The next idea is one that I'm sure you have heard of if you are using the EPI method. This is called a delayed dictation. So the pupils hear, or you might just let them see initially, a sentence for 10 seconds. And this should ideally contain a minimum of 95% comprehensible input. The teacher tells the students to hold it in their heads for 10 seconds before writing it down. And as they do this, you could make funny noises, you could utter random second language words to distract them for a few seconds, or you can just have silence. You know your class best. Finally, you would ask them to write their sentence on their mini whiteboards or in their books and then share with you their answers. So an example of a really simple delayed dictation on your whiteboard screen, you could just have the instructions, look at the phrase on the board for 10 seconds. Once it's gone, write down what you can remember. Again, a medium challenge, medium support idea. This is called a MAD dictation, and this is thanks to the wonderful Steve Smith. So Steve suggests that you select a text containing familiar sentence patterns or highly comprehensible input. You tell your students to listen to the text as you read it at near natural speed and note down key words. You then tell them to pair up with another student and compare the keywords that they noted. You tell them they are going to work with that person for the rest of the task. You then read the text a second time, some bits slowly, some bits very fast, and some are at a moderate pace. And this deliberately ensures that the students miss out some of the words. The students work again with their partner to reconstruct the text. The teacher reads the text a final time, still varying the speed of delivery, and then gives the students another final chance to work with their partner. They get 30 seconds to go around the tables and compare notes with other pairs. This is a great one they could do with a highlighter pen to highlight where they've got it correct and where perhaps they might need to work on their dictation skills a bit further. The next idea is another medium challenge, medium support. This is about scaffolding picture dictation. This is adapted from an idea from Steve Smith. This is something that I've been doing for a number of years since I heard a brilliant idea from an English language teacher. So you would supply the first letter of each word to be transcribed or get the pupils to do this themselves on the first time of hearing. You would then provide a gapped version omitting nouns and words that can be easily replaced by pictures. So these could be used alongside the first letters to help the learners to piece together the transcript. To offer even more support, you could provide a translation. You give the students a translation in English of the text that you read, like a parallel text, and this would allow them to focus on the form, so in other words, the phonics, less than the meaning, and this would lighten the load on their memory. Moving on now to high challenge and low support, we're going to look now at the idea of a relay dictation. I think when I was training to teach, this was known as a running dictation. So the students would see several sentences stuck around the classroom on strips of paper. They would work in small groups to compete to finish first. The students are going to take turns to read some or all of the strip of paper, and they have to memorize. They can't read out or shout it aloud to the group. The appointed scribe would then write down what the student dictates, and the pen is then passed, and the next student finds a strip to read or dictate. The winners are the group with the most accurate transcription. Now, when I first tried this idea, I thought it was going to fall flat. I didn't have the conviction that it was going to work or that the students would enjoy it. But I've tried this with a number of different classes, going from young to older, and it works brilliantly every time. And I think that competitive element of finishing first and the degree of accuracy, perhaps awarding more points for accuracy than completing it quickly, really helps the students' motivation. And then, as we said earlier, high challenge and no support. What we're aiming for really in terms of what the students will be expected to do in their exam is what we know as classic dictation, where the teacher will choose a short text to read aloud. And again, I was thinking it could be a model answer for a writing question. And this is something that I'm working on at the moment with my year 11 learners. And then the pupils unaided have spent a good chunk of time building their confidence in transcription. So really thinking about stages 1 to 3, putting a lot of behind the scenes effort in year 7, 8, 9, and 10 into that skill. And then having them listen carefully several times, maybe twice, third if you want to. Remember, this is just about building confidence and having them prepare themselves for the exam. And then finally, they would reconstruct the passage in correct, accurate target language. Before I finish and round things up today, I wanted to mention a couple of tools online that you could use. So I wanted to mention Teachit. I haven't been on this website for a number of months, but somebody alerted me to it when I put a call out for ideas around dictation. And it really has developed. It's a free website, and if you have a look at the top left-hand image, there are lots and lots of different ways in which you can introduce dictation through this free technology. So you can use multiple choice, you can have word blocks, you can just have the vowels missing, you can just have the consonants missing. A number of ways to really build your students' confidence. So in the top right-hand box, you can see that they would listen to a song. And again, this might be good for building confidence and motivation. Choose a familiar song or a relevant, up-to-date pop song. And then they listen to that. And at various points, it stops. And the students have just simply got to click on what they've heard. The next level up might be, as I said, just to delete the vowels or delete certain letters. So you can see in the bottom left-hand box, you've got a series of missing vowels and the students just simply got to correct, so click on the correct one. And then a little bit more complex, so building up in the degree of complexity. The bottom right, they have got missing words, complete missing words, and they have to listen and use the keypad to be able to complete those. So really good degree of difficulty there, and building up from very, very gentle, easy, light touch dictation to something much more complex. Another tool that I came across recently is called SpeechLing, and you can have this as an app or you can just use it on your PC. There is a dictation tool, which again, once your students have perhaps progressed through levels 1 to 4, they might want to go onto this app, or you would encourage them in their free time. And again, it's from beginners to advanced level. There's also a free audio dictionary on there. So again, that might help your students with their phonic awareness. So just rounding the dictation section up, I put dictation, the dreaded D word. We know that the dreaded G word is grammar. Is dictation suddenly going to become the dreaded D word? Is the G word going to be replaced by the D word? Hopefully not. So here are some top tips. I would suggest that you work on your pupils' phonic awareness first. I think you can gently start to introduce dictation skills in year 7, but I think I would personally be inclined to do some phonic awareness first. Build your pupils' confidence over time. So start in Key Stage 3, or if you are a primary practitioner, then start even earlier. The earlier, the better. If as a teacher you fear that dictation is going to be boring, and in my experience it really isn't, you can spice it up in a number of ways, and it's really all down to your delivery. So again, thinking about using exaggerated intonation, silly voices such as a robot, to get the children to come up with ideas even. Use gestures to drop hints and add some fun, so wild arm gestures for the French accents, for example. Deliberately either use very slow or fast or loud or quiet delivery. And as I said earlier, ask your pupils for ideas, because sometimes they will surprise you with their creativity. So just to finish today, I hope that those activities and ideas have given you a little bit of food for thought. And again, I hope you will agree that most of them require minimal or zero preparation. It's really just about thinking about how you are going to progressively introduce these 2 new skill areas into your schemes of learning, so that from year 7 all the way through to year 11, the students are beginning to get exam ready. So a couple of links on here to blogs by Esmeralda Salgado and Steve Smith, who have spoken at length recently about the new GCSE and also specifically about dictation. And then we've got on here a link to Joli Phonique, so the French Joli Phonics scheme of learning. We've got the Planet Phonics resources from Wedi Adeniji at Speakeasy, and they're available in French, German, and Spanish. They're very highly recommended. If you have a budget, again, these are used by many primary practitioners, but also very useful in secondary. Stu Cave's Physical French and Spanish phonics resources. If you subscribe to the NSELP schemes of learning, you will also know that there is a phonics element to their schemes of work, so you might want to visit that link. Remember that Teachit languages also have their mastering pronunciation packs in French and Spanish, and it's worth saying at this point that there are some mastering dictation packs in the planning stages. And then finally, go onto your Teachit languages account and have a look for dictation and phonics activities, because there are a wealth of them on there. Thank you so much for your time today. I really do hope that that has been useful. Please do get in touch if I can give you any other support or assistance. And thank you very much for your time today. Take care.